December 7th, 1941, a date that would live in infamy. The sun rose over the calm waters of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Sailors went about their morning routines, unaware that in mere minutes their world would explode into chaos. Across the Pacific, the Japanese Imperial Navy had been preparing meticulously for months. They sought to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet before America could intervene in Japan's expansion across Asia. At 7:55 a.m., waves of aircraft screamed overhead. Bombs rained from the sky. Ships burned, exploding like fireworks gone horribly wrong. Battleships sank in minutes. The air smelled of oil and fire. Sailors leapt from decks into the burning harbor, fighting for survival. Aircraft that had been grounded were obliterated on the tarmac. Within hours, over 2,400 Americans lay dead. More than 1,000 were wounded. The Pacific War had begun. The United States, shocked and enraged, would never forget the audacity of that attack. And across the oceans, Japan believed they had secured a quick, decisive advantage. But as the smoke cleared, one truth became clear. The Pacific was about to become a theater of total war, stretching thousands of miles, with battles that would test courage, endurance, and strategy like never before. June 1942. The Pacific War had reached a critical juncture. Japan had won stunning victories across the Pacific. The Philippines, Malaya, Hong Kong, and the Dutch East Indies. Confidence in the Imperial Navy soared. Admiral Yamamoto, the brilliant architect of Pearl Harbor, believed he could lure the remaining U.S. carriers into a trap and deliver a decisive blow that would cement Japan's dominance of the Pacific. The stage was set. Midway Atoll, a small cluster of islands halfway between Asia and North America, became the most strategically important location in the Pacific. The calculated trap. Yamamoto planned to attack Midway with a massive strike force. 4 aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Hundreds of planes ready to destroy the island's defenses. But unknown to him, American cryptographers had broken Japan's naval code. The U.S. knew the attack was coming and prepared an ambush. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the Pacific Fleet, positioned 3 carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown, to meet the Japanese fleet in open ocean. The Clash of Titans. On June 4th, the first wave of Japanese planes attacked Midway. The island's defenders fought back fiercely, anti-aircraft guns blazing. Bombers and torpedo planes scrambled, dodging flak and Japanese fighters. Meanwhile, American carrier planes, flying long-range missions over hundreds of miles of open water, searched for the enemy fleet. At 10:22 a.m., American dive bombers found the Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. In a breathtaking cinematic moment, planes dove from thousands of feet. Bombs pierced flight decks. Explosions engulfed hangars full of fueled and armed aircraft. In less than an hour, 3 Japanese carriers were destroyed, tipping the balance of naval power in the Pacific. USS Yorktown and the cost of victory. The USS Yorktown was heavily damaged by Japanese planes, but played a critical role in turning the tide. American losses were serious, but far outweighed the destruction Japan suffered. By June 7th, the Japanese fleet was in retreat, its dream of Pacific dominance shattered. The turning point. Midway was not just a battle. It was a psychological and strategic blow to Japan. For the first time, Japanese expansion stalled. The U.S. gained confidence and momentum. From this moment, the Allies would go on the offensive across the Pacific. Island by island, inch by bloody inch. Midway proved that intelligence, courage, and timing could defeat even the most confident enemy. The war in the Pacific had changed forever. After Pearl Harbor, Japan's expansion was swift and relentless. The Philippines, a strategic American territory in the Pacific, became one of the first major targets. By December 8, 1941, Japanese bombers and troops struck the islands, overwhelming defenders. American and Filipino forces, though courageous, were outnumbered and outgunned. Cities burned, airfields were destroyed, and communication lines severed. Civilians fled as villages and towns became battle zones overnight. The Bataan Peninsula. American and Filipino troops retreated to the rugged Bataan Peninsula, holding out against relentless Japanese attacks. Supplies dwindled. Food and medicine became scarce. The siege tested every soldier's endurance and resolve. Starvation and disease claimed as many lives as bullets. Despite their efforts, by April 9, 1942, Bataan fell. The fall of Corregidor. Meanwhile, on Corregidor Island, the last bastion of American resistance in the Philippines, defenders held out under continuous bombardment. By May 6, 1942, the island surrendered, and the Japanese had effectively secured control of the Philippines. This early wave of victories showcased Japan's precision, coordination, and ruthless strategy. It was a demonstration of blitzkrieg-style warfare in the Pacific. Fast, decisive, and devastating. But these victories came at a cost. For Japan, the resistance, though scattered, planted seeds for long-term Allied retaliation. August 7, 1942. For the first time in the Pacific, the Allies went on the offensive. Guadalcanal, a small volcanic island in the Solomon Islands chain, held a critical airfield that Japan was completing. Control of this airfield meant control of sea lanes between the U.S. and Australia, vital for the Allied strategy. The United States Marines landed on the beaches, facing Japanese defenders entrenched in dense jungles, with machine guns and artillery hidden among the trees. Jungle warfare and brutal combat. The battle was unlike anything seen before. Thick jungle limited visibility. Swarms of mosquitoes and disease claimed countless lives. Heat, humidity, and lack of fresh water tested every soldier. Marines moved from beachheads to inland positions, clearing enemy bunkers and fortifications. Every step was contested. Every night brought ambushes, sniper fire, and hand-to-hand combat. Japanese defenders were relentless, often fighting to the last man. The Allies discovered the Japanese Bushido Code. Surrender was dishonorable, so soldiers fought fiercely, making every advance a bloody struggle. Naval battles and air skirmishes. Guadalcanal was not just fought on land. The surrounding waters became a deadly chessboard. U.S. Navy warships clashed with Japanese destroyers in night battles. Aircraft from carriers and Henderson Field strafed and bombed enemy positions. Control of the skies was constant and vital. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons, Cape Esperance, and other naval clashes proved that naval air power was the decisive weapon in the Pacific. The cost of victory. By early 1943, after months of grueling combat, the Allies finally secured Guadalcanal. Thousands of Japanese soldiers were killed, captured, or starved. The airfield became a forward base for further Allied operations. Morale soared for the Allies, while Japan faced its first significant strategic setback. Guadalcanal demonstrated that island warfare would be long, brutal, and unforgiving. and that every victory came at a staggering human cost. By 1943, the Allies had learned a crucial lesson from Guadalcanal and Midway. They could not match Japan ship for ship across the Pacific. Instead, they would strike smart, advancing island by island, a strategy known as island hopping. The goal was clear: bypass heavily fortified Japanese strongholds and capture strategically valuable islands, building airfields and naval bases to push closer to Japan. Tactical precision and brutality. Island hopping was not easy. Each new island presented dense jungles teeming with mosquitoes and diseases, entrenched Japanese defenders willing to fight to the last man, coral reefs and rough beaches that made amphibious landings perilous. The Marines learned to strike swiftly at weak points, cut off supply lines, and isolate enemy garrisons. Every operation required coordination between Navy, Air Force, and ground troops. Iconic battles. Some of the fiercest battles of the campaign included Tarawa, 1943. Marines faced strong Japanese fortifications. Heavy casualties highlighted the high cost of island assaults. Saipan, 1944. Key to launching long-range bombers against Japan, intense civilian and military resistance. Guam and Peleliu. Brutal fights with entrenched Japanese soldiers in caves and bunkers showcased relentless courage on both sides. Amphibious landings were a cinematic nightmare. Soldiers wading through surf, under machine gun fire, with explosions and smoke blanketing the beaches. Strategic impact. Island hopping allowed the Allies to cut Japan off from vital resources in Southeast Asia, establish airfields for long-range bombers, push the Japanese defensive perimeter steadily westward. This strategy slowly but surely turned the tide of the Pacific War. Every island captured brought the Allies closer to Japan itself. The human cost. Victory came at enormous human cost. Thousands of soldiers killed, wounded, or psychologically scarred. Civilians trapped in fighting zones suffered greatly. Entire islands were left in ruins, a testament to the savagery of the war. Yet, despite the hardships, hope and determination fueled the Allied advance. The war in the Pacific was far from over, but the momentum had shifted. Turning point in the Pacific War, the liberation of the Philippines. After years of Japanese occupation, the Allies launched the largest naval battle in history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The goal was to cut off Japan from vital resources in Southeast Asia and reclaim territory vital for strategic control. Amphibious landings and fierce resistance. On October 20th, 1944, thousands of U.S. soldiers landed on Leyte's beaches. Japanese defenders used fortified positions, kamikaze attacks, and ambushes in jungles and towns. Every advance inland became a bloody struggle, with soldiers facing machine gun fire, artillery, and snipers. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. Towns burned, villages were destroyed. The cost of reclaiming the Philippines was staggering, yet morale soared. Hope for liberation fueled the soldiers. The naval clash. At sea, the battle escalated to unprecedented scale. Over 280 ships from both sides clashed in multiple engagements. Aircraft carriers launched relentless strikes. Kamikaze attacks inflicted devastating losses on Allied fleets. Japanese commanders hoped to destroy the landing forces before they could consolidate their position. But the Allied naval power and coordination proved overwhelming. By October 26th, The Japanese Navy had suffered near total defeat. Leyte Gulf effectively ended Japan's capacity to wage large-scale naval battles. Strategic and psychological impact. The Philippines' liberation reopened sea lanes for Allied supply and reinforcement. Japanese defensive perimeter began collapsing across the Pacific. Kamikaze attacks became desperate symbols of Japan's dwindling options. The battle demonstrated the courage, sacrifice, and coordination required in the Pacific. A war of attrition, ingenuity, and relentless determination. The human cost. Thousands of soldiers and sailors died. Civilians endured occupation, displacement, and trauma. Entire islands were devastated by bombardments and urban combat. Yet Leyte Gulf was a major step toward Japan itself, signaling that the Allies were now striking at the heart of the empire. February 19, 1945. The tiny volcanic island of Iwo Jima, only 8 square miles in size, became one of the most gruesome and iconic battles of the Pacific War. The island was critical for the Allies. It offered airfields within bomber range of Japan, providing a vital staging point for attacks and emergency landings. But Japan was determined to defend it at all costs. Brutal entrenchment. Japanese defenders had prepared for months. Thousands of miles of tunnels and bunkers carved into volcanic rock. Artillery, machine guns, and snipers hidden everywhere. A strategy to fight to the death, inflicting maximum casualties on invading forces. American Marines landed on beaches under unrelenting fire, facing a landscape that seemed almost engineered for slaughter. The human cost. Iwo Jima was hell on earth. Soldiers trudged through sand, ash, and smoke. Artillery shells ripped through the air constantly. Every advance inland meant intense hand-to-hand combat in tunnels and caves. Casualties were staggering. Nearly 7,000 U.S. Marines died. Over 20,000 were wounded. Almost all 21,000 Japanese defenders perished, most refusing to surrender. Mount Suribachi and the iconic flag raising. On February 23, 1945, a small group of Marines climbed Mount Suribachi, the island's highest point, under sniper fire. Raising the American flag atop Suribachi became a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and determination, immortalized in one of the most famous photographs of the war. Strategic impact. Iwo Jima proved several lessons. Japanese defenders were tenacious and innovative. Island warfare required immense resources and coordination. The Allies were now within striking distance of Japan itself. Though the cost was horrifying, the capture of Iwo Jima paved the way for Okinawa and, ultimately, the end of the Pacific War. April 1st, 1945. Operation Iceberg. The Allied invasion of Okinawa, Japan's southernmost stronghold, began. It was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War, involving nearly 200,000 U.S. troops, hundreds of ships, and thousands of aircraft. Okinawa was no ordinary battlefield. The island's rugged terrain, cliffs, caves, and dense forests turned every step into a death trap. The Japanese defenders had prepared meticulously, determined to fight to the very last man. Amphibious landings and immediate chaos. As dawn broke, Marines, soldiers, and sailors waded through surf laced with mines and floating debris. Japanese artillery and machine guns raked the beaches. Smoke from burning ships and explosions shrouded the coastline. Corpses, wreckage, and the cries of the wounded painted a horrific scene. Advance inland was slow and bloody. Each village, hill, and ridge became a fortress of death. Ars kamikaze attacks and naval hell. Okinawa was also the stage for Japan's last desperate weapon, the kamikaze. Thousands of suicide pilots targeted U.S. ships with terrifying precision. Aircraft exploded on decks, destroying battleships and transport vessels. Sailors faced constant terror, knowing death could strike from above at any moment. Naval battles raged far beyond the beaches. Destroyers, cruisers, and carriers were battered by relentless airstrikes. The sea itself became a war zone, littered with wreckage and oil fires. Or jungle and cave warfare. Inland, Marines faced a labyrinth of caves and tunnels. Japanese soldiers had prepared elaborate defensive networks, allowing them to strike suddenly and vanish, leaving troops trapped and exposed. Hand-to-hand combat was frequent and brutal. Snipers picked off soldiers from hidden positions. Artillery and mortar fire shook the ground continuously. The fight for each ridge and plateau took days, sometimes weeks. Casualties mounted with every advance. Were civilians suffering? Okinawan civilians were caught between the two armies. Thousands were killed in bombings and crossfire. Many were forced into shelters in caves with limited food or water. Fear, confusion, and desperation pervaded every corner of the island. The human cost was staggering. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers died, and nearly half of the civilian population perished. The endgame. By June 1945, after 82 grueling days of combat, Okinawa fell to the Allies. The island was devastated. Strategic airfields were captured, allowing bombing raids on Japan's home islands. The battle foreshadowed the horrors of a potential mainland invasion. Okinawa marked the final step before the atomic bombings. It revealed the Japanese determination to fight to the last man, and the extreme sacrifices required by the Allies. August 1945. World War II had reached its final, devastating chapter in the Pacific. After years of island-hopping campaigns, naval battles, and relentless air raids, the Allies faced a grim choice: invade mainland Japan, or find a way to force a surrender without catastrophic casualties. The Japanese military was determined to fight to the last soldier. Cities were heavily defended. Civilians were mobilized. The potential death toll from a mainland invasion was projected to be in the millions. The Manhattan Project and the birth of the atomic bomb. Meanwhile, a secret weapon had been in development in the United States since 1942, the Manhattan Project. Scientists worked tirelessly across the U.S. to harness the power of nuclear fission. The goal: create a bomb capable of ending the war decisively. By mid-1945, 2 bombs were ready. Little Boy, a uranium bomb; Fat Man, a plutonium bomb. The target: Japanese cities that were militarily significant yet would demonstrate the bomb's power. Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. On the morning of August 6th, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay took off from Tinian Island, carrying Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb detonated 1,900 feet above Hiroshima. The explosion was instantaneous and cataclysmic. 70,000, 80,000 people died immediately. Buildings, bridges, and infrastructure vanished in a blinding flash. Fires engulfed the city, and the skies were filled with a mushroom cloud rising miles into the atmosphere. Civilians, many unaware of the bomb's destructive power, were obliterated in seconds. Survivors faced burns, radiation sickness, and an unimaginable landscape of ruin. Or Nagasaki, August 9th, 1945. 3 days later, Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. Death toll 40,000, 75,000 immediately, with tens of thousands more later from radiation. The industrial city, a key shipbuilding and military center, was reduced to rubble. Survivors faced the horror of firestorms, radiation sickness, and total devastation. Japan was finally forced to confront the unimaginable. The war was over, and the human cost of modern technology was revealed in its most terrifying form. And the aftermath. By August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered unconditionally. World War II officially ended. The consequences were profound. Over 70 million lives lost worldwide. Cities destroyed. Economies shattered. Populations traumatized. The atomic bomb changed warfare forever. Introducing the nuclear age. The Pacific War had shown humanity the heights of courage and heroism, and the depths of destruction. Soldiers, civilians, and nations were scarred forever. Hiroshima and Nagasaki would serve as eternal reminders of war's ultimate cost and the moral responsibility that comes with immense power. August 15, 1945. The world had waited 6 long years for peace. Yet the path to this moment was paved with unimaginable horror and sacrifice. From the deserts of North Africa to the frozen forests of Russia, from the beaches of Normandy to the volcanic islands of the Pacific, humanity had witnessed the greatest conflict in history. And now the focus was Japan, a nation battered, broken, but fiercely proud. The moment of surrender. The decision to surrender was not taken lightly. Japan's military leaders debated, clashed, and struggled against the inevitable. Some argued for continued resistance, even if it meant total annihilation. Others realized that the war had reached a point where survival demanded capitulation. Finally, Emperor Hirohito intervened. On August 15th, he addressed the nation through a radio broadcast. The first time most Japanese had ever heard his voice. His words were measured, solemn, and heavy with historical significance. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. The Japanese nation must accept the inevitable. Millions of listeners were stunned. Soldiers and civilians alike faced the reality that the fight was over, and that the war that had consumed their lives and shaped a generation was finally ending. The aftermath of surrender. The surrender brought immediate relief and overwhelming grief. Allied forces occupied Japan to ensure demilitarization and reconstruction. Cities lay in ruins, millions displaced, food scarce, and infrastructure devastated. Soldiers returned home to face physical and emotional scars, haunted by what they had witnessed. Globally, the consequences were profound. Germany had fallen months earlier, following the suicide of Hitler and the capture of Berlin. Millions of civilians in Europe and Asia were dead or displaced. The United Nations was established to prevent future global conflicts. Lessons and legacy. World War II had reshaped the modern world. Military strategy had evolved with tanks, aircraft carriers, submarines, and atomic weapons. Civilians became central in war, facing bombings and occupation. The concept of total war demonstrated that global conflicts affected every corner of the world. The Pacific War, in particular, left indelible marks on history. Courage, sacrifice, and suffering intertwined in every battle, every landing, every sky above the islands of Japan. A global reflection. Over 70 million lives lost worldwide. Cities reduced to rubble. Economies shattered. Political, social, and technological landscapes permanently transformed. Yet, amid the destruction, humanity endured. Survivors carried the stories, the memories and the warnings of war, ensuring that history would never forget the price of conflict. World War II was over. Peace, fragile but profound, had returned.